The utterly inexplicable disappearance of Asha Degree is probably one of the most well-known and frustrating cold cases to be endlessly scrutinized and discussed across the internet. There are countless YouTube videos covering the case, as well as several podcast episodes, and there's even a subreddit dedicated entirely to figuring out what exactly happened to the 9-year-old Asha more than 20 years ago in the early hours of Valentine's Day 2000. With all that said, what's my reason for covering Asha's story yet again, if the internet is by and large already highly aware of it? Well, for one thing, it never hurts to continue to spread awareness to those who may be unfamiliar with the case, especially now when we're quickly approaching the 21st anniversary of Asha's disappearance. The case has also seen some recent developments, with someone claiming in November 2020 that he knows what happened to Asha, claiming she was murdered and that he knows where to find her. Last I checked, police were holding off on interviewing this man due to health and safety concerns related to the pandemic. The man, Marcus Mellon, was convicted of child sex crimes in 2014. Of course, they'll want to interview him in person rather than over Zoom, because the subtle body language that often goes uncaptured during video calls might just help investigators determine whether he's lying or telling the truth. Time will tell whether his information will ultimately solve the case, which remains a deeply perplexing mystery. In this video, I'm going to do two things: retell Asha's story, and then give my own personal theory as to what I think may have happened to her. Please keep in mind that I'm not privy to any information that isn't already public knowledge, and know fully that my thoughts may have no bearing on the case whatsoever. I'm simply here to share what I think may have happened. If you're familiar with this case already, feel free to skip past my retelling of Asha's story. Although the story itself is very strange, and is as fascinating as it is tragic, so it may be worth a re-listen, assuming you've heard it before. So without further delay, before giving my thoughts on the matter, I present to you the disturbing and mind-boggling case of the vanishing of Asha Degree. 9-year-old Asha Degree lived with her parents Harold and Aquila and her 10-year-old brother O'Brien in the mostly quiet town of Shelby, North Carolina. The Degree parents were protective of their children, keeping their social circles limited to extended family, church, and school. They didn't have a computer in their home, with Aquila later citing her concern about online child predators. Asha and O'Brien had their own house keys and were expected to let themselves into the house after school each day and begin their homework, as their parents' work schedules prevented them from getting home to let them inside the house. On February 11th, 2000, a Friday, at Falston Elementary School, where the Degree children attended, classes were not being held, likely for a teacher's workday. With their parents away at work, Asha and O'Brien spent the day with their Aunt Alicia, who lived in the neighborhood. From their Aunt Alicia's house, the Degree children went to their youth basketball practice at their school. The following day, Saturday, February 12th, both Asha and O'Brien had games at Burns Middle School. Asha, a star point guard, fouled out. Her team lost, and she blamed herself. She became upset, crying with her teammates, but seemed to be in a much better mood by the end of her brother's game. Asha's team received candy bags at the game as gifts. That night, Asha had a sleepover at a relative's house with her cousins. On Sunday, February 13th, the Degree children went to a service at Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church from Aunt Alicia's house. After church, they returned to Aunt Alicia's house, and then were picked up by Aquila, who took them home. Harold Degree would be working late into the evening at PPG Industries until about midnight. At around 8 p.m. on Sunday, Asha readied herself for bed. She shared a bedroom with O'Brien. A storm was rolling in that night and a car crash occurred, knocking out the neighborhood's power. By 12:30 a.m. on February 14th, the power was restored. and Harold had returned home. He looked into the kids' bedroom to find them fast asleep. Some reports say that Harold made a quick trip to the store for last-minute Valentine's and anniversary gifts after this, as in addition to being Valentine's Day, the 14th was his wedding anniversary. Regardless of whether he went out again, Harold watched TV from sometime after 12:30 until 2:30 a.m., checked on the kids once more to find them perfectly fine, and then went to bed himself. Not long after this, O'Brien heard Asha's bed squeak, but thought nothing of it, assuming she was shifting positions, and went back to sleep. Apparently around this time, Asha got out of bed, taking a backpack she'd previously packed with several sets of her favorite clothes and personal items, and left the house. Between 3:45 and 4:15 a.m., a truck driver and a motorist spotted Asha walking along Highway 18 about a mile south of her home, wearing a long-sleeved white t-shirt and white pants. They didn't report this immediately. This may sound strange, but this was 2000, and not everyone owned a cell phone. Around 5 p.m. on Monday, upon seeing a TV report that Asha was considered missing, at least one of the witnesses reported what they saw. One of the witnesses turned his vehicle around to try and assist Asha when he saw her, but she apparently became frightened by him and ran into the woods. She hasn't been seen since. At 5:45 a.m., Aquila awoke. She drew a bath for the children, which wasn't typical, but the power outage had prevented the children from taking their bath the previous night. Aquila went to wake up the children. She found O'Brien in his bed and Asha missing. Unable to locate Asha anywhere in the house or in the family's cars, Aquila called her mother-in-law, who lived across the street, thinking Asha may have went to her house for some reason. When this turned out not to be the case, Aquila and Harold panicked. Aquila called her mother, who told her to call the police. The search for Asha Degree thus began. Initial efforts proved fruitless. Investigators were only able to turn up a mitten, which Aquila said did not belong to Asha. In fact, it was found Asha took no winter clothing with her at all from the house, despite it being a rainy winter day. There were no signs of a break-in, seeming to indicate Asha left on her own accord, in spite of having no clear reason for running away. Search dogs could not detect her scent. One might think this is because the wet weather washed her scent away, but in reality the rain and cold weather would help refresh the scent. The wind, though, may have been a factor in preventing the dogs from catching whiff of anything. The next day, on February 15th, a man who ran a local upholstery business found candy wrappers in his shed that matched the type of candy Asha was given at the basketball game, along with a pencil, a marker, and a Mickey Mouse-shaped hair bow. All these were identified as belonging to Asha. There was also a photo of a young girl in the shed, though Asha's family could not identify her, and she wasn't found to be anyone who attended Asha's school. The shed was located along the highway, near where Asha was seen fleeing into the woods. A new, wide-reaching search was launched, but police were never given a good lead that would take them in the right direction. Soon, the FBI and North Carolina's Statute Bureau of Investigation became involved, and investigation continued for several months. 2000 transitioned into 2001, which is when the next big clue would emerge, in August of that year. Asha's book bag, buried underground and wrapped in 2 garbage bags, was uncovered during a construction project off Highway 18, about 26 miles north of Shelby. The worker who found the bag said it had Asha's name and phone number written inside. He at first didn't understand the bag's significance, being unfamiliar with the case, but thankfully his wife knew of Asha's disappearance and implored him to call the police immediately. The FBI conducted forensic analysis on the bag, but the results haven't been released publicly. The FBI wouldn't reveal the contents of the bag until February 2020, when they confirmed it contained 2 items that were found inside. the Dr. Seuss book McElligot's Pool, and a t-shirt depicting the band New Kids on the Block. These appear not to have been Asha's property before they were found in the bag. The Dr. Seuss book was from her school's library, though records of who checked the book out unfortunately don't go as far back as 2000. Investigators believe these two items are critical to solving the case, and ask anyone who knows anything about them to report their information, though no one knows why the items are so important. To date, the book bag has been the last piece of major evidence found in the case. The only other notable development is from 2016, when the FBI announced a possible new lead they turned up from their reinvestigation into the case, which they launched in 2015. They disclosed that Asha may have been seen getting into a dark green early 1970s Lincoln Continental Mark IV, or possibly a 70s Ford Thunderbird, along Highway 18 near where she was last seen on the night of her disappearance. It was described as having rust around its wheel wells. 2 people were said to have been in the car. So, what happened to Asha? The internet abounds with theories. In order to solve the case, we first need to answer one extremely important question. Why did Asha leave the house that night in the first place? Some say she was sleepwalking, while others contend she was in fact running away from home for some unknown reason. And then there's the theory I think is the most likely. I think Asha was going to meet someone. It's been suggested that she was going to innocently meet a friend for some secret Valentine's Day engagement, but I lean more toward the possibility that she was walking into the clutches of a child predator who'd been grooming her unbeknownst to her family. I believe this predator was someone that Asha knew, from church, school, or even within her own family, though her parents, I think it's safe to say, weren't involved, given their vigorous efforts to find Asha, and the fact that we know at least Harold passed a polygraph test. I think it's possible the predator was a stranger, though less likely. The stranger could have indeed been from the internet. Though Asha didn't have access to a computer at home, perhaps she did at school. I think the fact that Asha went out on a cold, stormy night, despite reportedly being terrified of the dark and storms, indicates whomever she was meeting, if she was in fact meeting someone, was someone she fully trusted, and who had fabricated an important reason for their meeting. Supposing the New Kids on the Block shirt found in the book bag belonged to the predator, it's quite possible they were fairly young. Maybe they were a fan of the band, which reached its peak popularity in the 80s. If the predator was indeed an 80s kid, that would make them a preteen, teen, or young adult by the time Asha disappeared. The predator also doesn't need to be a man, as is perhaps stereotypical of child predators. Nothing says it couldn't have been a woman. If they were young and or female, I could see how a young girl like Asha would feel comfortable around them. Or they may have been an adult authority figure from one of Asha's few social spheres, whom the family knew and trusted. It's hard to arrive at an exact profile of a possible predator, but I do believe it's most likely that a predator's invitation was why Asha left the house. Many have theorized that perhaps Asha left the house on her own accord because she was inspired by a book her class was reading called The Whipping Boy, in which 2 children go on a nighttime adventure. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that a 9-year-old child would come up with a grand adventure to set out on based on something they read in a book. That said, I think not enough attention has been given to the other book in the case, McElligot's Pool. I couldn't find anyone discussing the contents of the book and how they might be relevant to the case, so I took a look inside. Sure enough, early in the book, a highway is depicted underneath which a stream of water from the titular pool flows. It's even referred to as a state highway, not unlike Route 18, which Asha was walking down. With this in mind, I think that someone may have gained Asha's trust by giving her this book as a gift. Asha loved books and wanted to be an illustrator when she grew up. So this book, with its fanciful illustrations, along with possibly the whipping boy, would probably be special to her. This is pure wild speculation, but what if McElligot's Pool served as an instruction manual of sorts to Asha, letting her know she needed to follow a highway early in the morning before the sun rose on February 14th. In the book, the highway leads to the ocean, and creepily enough, there are large bodies of water only 7.5 miles from Asha's house on Oak Crest Drive, Boland's Fishing Lake, and Kings Mountain Reservoir. You would get to both by traveling down Highway 18. So if this theory holds any water, no pun intended, why on earth would the possible predator want Asha meeting them at a lake? Well, that's where the significance of the date of her disappearance, February 14th, comes into play. As some have also proposed, I think Asha left the house because someone convinced her they would help her to create an anniversary/Valentine surprise for her parents. Let's consider again what Asha brought with her. Not a winter jacket, but her favorite clothes. She also apparently brought photos of her family. I have to credit the Criminology podcast for revealing this to me, as I hadn't known based on my prior research of the case. I also have to credit that particular podcast with giving me the idea that Asha believed she was going out for a photo shoot. She brought outfits that were apparently well coordinated, with several articles of clothing depicting Tweety Bird. This would explain why she didn't bring a winter coat. She didn't want it in the photos she believed she was going to take. It's possible Asha meant to use the photos she stowed in her book bag, along with the photos she planned to take, to create a portrait package for her family. Perhaps she was also going to include the candy in the gift, before eating it while possibly hiding out in the shed during the storm. Maybe the pencil and marker were brought along to write on some sort of card for her family. The photo of the mysterious girl found in the shed could also have been part of this possible gift. I wouldn't be surprised if a child predator gave the picture to Asha, which looks like a sample photo of a school portrait, saying it was his or her sibling or daughter. Maybe this predator even hid behind the very same photo online, if Asha did in fact first come in contact with them through a school computer. I think it's possible that a predator told her to follow the highway to a lake, because it would make for a beautiful backdrop for the photos they promised would be taken. The reason she had to do this early on the morning of February 14th, despite the storm, was because the gift had to be ready in time for her parents' anniversary. So that's the theory I've come up with. Granted, a lot still doesn't make sense. Why weren't the police dogs able to get Asha's scent, for example? I first thought that if a predator was driving that green 70s car, perhaps they first picked Asha up and drove her for a certain distance before depositing her at the spot where she was spotted. Though why the predator would do this escapes me, unless they feared having Asha in the car would look suspicious, so they had her walk the rest of the way. Maybe they planned to pick her up again at a farther point down the highway. Maybe Asha ran from the motorist who spotted her because the predator instructed her to not talk to anyone. From here, who knows what happened. Maybe Asha became lost and took refuge in the shed. Maybe the predator or even someone else entirely found her, cementing her fate. If a predator was involved, or two predators considering the witness of the car reported it contained 2 people, there's one last thing that boggles the mind. Why was the backpack deposited where it was? It's not likely Asha wandered to the spot where it was found, given it was almost 30 miles away from her home. Someone placed it there, taking care to wrap it in 2 garbage bags, apparently for safekeeping. Some say Asha's killer meant to revisit the book bag, which they were keeping in that location as a sort of trophy. Others say the killer was trying to dispose of the evidence. If so, they did a poor job, because the backpack's items were completely intact and placed at the site of a construction job, where they were almost certain to be found. This is the one part of the story for which I can't find an explanation. One last thing before we go, the power outage. This is probably the most out-of-left-field thought on the case I've offered, but what if the car crash that caused it was intentional? What if the killer meant to force bath time to be rescheduled to distract Aquila while Asha ventured farther and farther away from the house? The car was described as having rusted wheel wells, but it was a dark, rainy night. What if the witness was really seeing damaged wheel wells from a staged accident? I admit this is a rather fanciful idea, but I thought I'd share it. If the killer did create the power outage to disrupt the family's routine, they'd have to know the family and their home life well, supporting the idea that someone close to the Degrees, or who at least knew them to some extent, was responsible for Asha's disappearance. Hopefully Marcus Mellon's information, if he truly has any, will shed some much-needed light on this utterly baffling case. Other inmates have feigned having information on Asha in order to get a lighter sentence or some other favor, so it's possible that that's the case with Mellon as well. But hopefully we will learn something new soon, and we'll be closer to solving Asha's case and bringing peace to the Degrees. Please keep them in your thoughts, as they've suffered greatly these past 21 years and still hold an annual walk in February to the spot where Asha disappeared, where they've erected a billboard asking anyone who may know something to call in with their information. I'm linking to both the website and the Facebook page dedicated to Asha, in case you have any information. I'd also like to thank the Criminology Podcast for helping me form my own theory about this case. I'm linking to their podcast as well. Thank you all so much for listening. Please stay safe out there. Stay spooky. And remember, don't get scared out of sorts.